All right, good morning, everyone. Hello, my name is Rose Spickler. I'm the Director of Statewide Engagement of Michigan Sustainable Business Forum, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's presentation of the Michigan Sustainable Business Forum webinar series. For those of you who are not familiar with our organization, the Forum is a collaboration of businesses and institutions dedicated to promoting practices that advance climate leadership, social justice, and the creation of a circular economy. We host events and programs throughout the state, including this monthly Michigan Sustainable Business Forum webinar series. We are sponsored by Shupan with additional support from Foresight Management. For our next event, Michigan Sustainable Business Forum Great Lakes Bay will be hosting a sustainability happy hour on February 22nd at 3 o'clock at Oracle Brewing in Saginaw. More details about that event can be found on MiSBF.org. Please do consider becoming a member of the forum. If you are already a corporate or institutional member of one of our regional programs, a professional MiSBF membership is complimentary. If not, you can become a professional member today for only $50. Now I'd like to introduce our program for today, Food Systems and Climate Action in the Great Lakes region, in which we'll have a conversation on the intersection of the food system and climate action. As many of you know, food systems are both impacted by climate change and major contributions to climate change. They have been recognized by the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change as an important target for global climate discussions and solutions. According to research done by Johns Hopkins Center for Livable Future, food policy councils across the Great Lakes region are sympathetic to decarbonization, and we found there is an opportunity to actively engage stakeholders in our food systems to collaborate and equitably eliminate greenhouse gas emissions from the food system. Over the last year, in conjunction with the REAMP network, Michigan Sustainable Business Forum has been working with a Food Policy Council action team to recruit members from the community of food policy councils to create a campaign that would encourage these councils to incorporate climate action in their advocacy and programming. We're continuing this work through education and advocacy in the food system, utilizing this webinar as a piece of that puzzle. Our 2022 project created a food policy toolkit, which we will discuss later in the webinar. This year, MiSBF will facilitate a cohort of food policy councils in the Great Lakes region to collaboratively develop a climate goal, action plan, and local campaign as demonstration projects for local climate action, utilizing and refining the toolkit alongside provided resources and coaching. We're really excited to be facilitating a mini grant offering to provide seed funding for food policy councils from around the area to develop and execute local projects over the course of a 6-month facilitated cohort. We'll provide more information about this offering later in the webinar. For now, I'd love to hand it over to speakers for today's webinar. For our attendees, please note that you can share thoughts and questions with the panelists or all attendees through the chat function. We will have slides available to attendees in an email following up with this recording, and we will have time at the end of the presentation for open questions and answers. Now I'd like to introduce today's panel of speakers. Roger Cooley, Executive Director of the Chicago Food Policy Action Council. Sarah DeHart-Faltico, Program Coordinator of Climate and Energy Project. Rachel Santo, Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future. And Kara DeWitt, co-founder of Southeast Market in Grand Rapids. Welcome panelists, and thank you for joining us today. First off, I'd just like to take a moment to introduce yourself, describe why the nexus between food systems and climate action is important to you, and give us an overview of your current projects. So we'll kick it off with Rachel, please.
Thank you, Rose, and thank you for the invitation to be here, and it's great to talk to you all. I'm Rachel Santo. I'm a Senior Research Program Coordinator at the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future. We are an interdisciplinary academic center based within the Bloomberg School of Public Health in Baltimore, Maryland. And our work focuses on public health research, education, policy, and advocacy to build more sustainable, equitable, and resilient food systems. And I'm going to pull up a slide just to show you some of our key areas of expertise and focus. Apologies. So we have 10 areas of focus, including food animal production, strengthening food systems resilience, food systems and climate change, seafood in the food system, reducing food waste, food equity, diet health and planetary boundaries, food systems change in Baltimore, food systems and urbanization, and food policy and governance. And so today I'm going to focus primarily on our food systems and climate work, But more broadly speaking, I came to this work 12 years ago, beginning as a student research assistant, and have worked in various roles at the center over that time. And my role in food systems and climate work really started building in 2015 when some colleagues and I were reviewing evidence in advance of the COP21 climate change conference held by the United Nations. This is the conference where the Paris Agreement was signed. And we were reviewing the evidence of research looking at the intersection of food systems and climate, both how food systems in agriculture are contributing to climate change and also how climate change is affecting the food system. And it was during that research and preparation that we really began to understand just the scope and gravity of the situation in terms of how drastically we need to reduce emissions, not only across all sectors, but especially in the agriculture sector. And if we reduced all of our other emissions from all other sectors to zero, and we didn't address food systems and agriculture related emissions, just our agriculture emissions would bypass our climate mitigation targets by 2050. And so that was really a wake-up call in my mind, but I think in many others too, that this is an area that we need to focus on. And so our work at the center has been around research, as well as communications, policy and advocacy, as well as technical assistance to address the intersection between food systems and climate issues. In addition to my work on food systems and climate, I also spend about half of my time at the center supporting the Food Policy Networks project, which many of you are involved with food policy councils may know. We connect food policy councils across the country and support them through a variety of resources, including a listserv, a directory of food policy councils, which we update on an annual or every other year basis using a survey of food policy councils. We have some webinars, resource database, and have also been recently focused on hosting some communities of practice. And so this is kind of some of our practice work at the center, is helping support the capacity of food policy advocates across the country to advance sustainable food policy change in their communities. And I briefly touched on this, but just to reiterate that our food systems and climate work really is at the intersection of both original research and also synthesis research, where we're taking existing research and distilling it down to the key points and kind of grappling with some of the nuances and comparisons across research data and translating that for general audiences and for policymakers. And then also technical assistance and partnerships with many collaborators, including food policy councils and other organizations across the country, and policy and advocacy. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kara.
Hi there. So happy to be with you all. I'm here early in the morning on Oahu, and it's, what is it, like 4 a.m. So I'm a little rusty in my voice, but I'm so happy to be with you. I'm the co-founder of Southeast Market. We began operations in the midst of COVID, open to the public just 2 years ago yesterday. So we're celebrating what we've been able to accomplish so far. Our mission at Southeast Market is to increase access to healthy, culturally approved, affordable food through a sustainable and equitable lens. A really tall order for a really small operation with a lot of work to do in a city that doesn't currently have any policy written around food. But our focus primarily is on the 49507, and we hope to end food insecurity as much as we have agency over by empowering food sovereignty and food justice. We hope through our advocacy and persistence that we get to see some results on health outcomes, increasing the presence of urban agriculture in our city, and advocating for access to land for urban growers. Excuse me. We have a year-round produce subscription, which allows us to support and have a relationship with small local farmers. We do a priority vendor program, and I'll share a screen so I can share a slide. But these are historically redline neighbors, or sorry, historically marginalized farmers who haven't had access to markets. So we want to prioritize first Black, Brown, Indigenous, female-led, local businesses and farms. These are some of the folks we work with. We're in close relationship with them, and It hasn't been easy. Their challenges are really hard, but we hope through just learning and growing along in relationship with them that will be better suited to advocate for their needs. Yeah, thank you so much.
Wonderful, Roger.
Great, thanks. Roger Cooley with the Chicago Food Policy Action Council. Let me get the slides going. So Roger Cooley with the Chicago Food Policy Action Council. I've been doing work in urban agriculture and sustainable food systems for a little over 20 years. Excited to be here and start talking about these collaborations and overlaps with food policy councils, but also through the REAMP network, which kind of brought us together. I'm excited for these collaborations and really starting to look at more significantly the overlaps between climate change and food policy, particularly at the local level through food policy councils where a lot of the energy happens, and really thinking about kind of, again, where the rubber hits the road, so to speak, between local food system choices and policies and advocacy investments are going to be really done at the local level. And so excited for getting to these collaborations and learning across all the different groups and sectors who are here today. So we've been around for about 20 years. We really focus on building relationships and community and networks for moving to longer term system change. Our mission is to co-develop, facilitate, and advocate for and support the implementation of policies that advance food justice and food sovereignty across the Chicago region. As part of that work, again, in the last few years, is to really start thinking about some of the overlaps of work and policies that we're advocating for, whether it's around equity in the food system, around economic opportunity that Kara was just highlighting, recognizing that's one of the fundamental issues that we have to deal with is, systemic inequities in the food system, but also recognizing that there's a lot of systemic inequities in the impacts of climate change. And so trying to find those overlaps are vital for our communities that we partner with. So again, a lot of the work that we do is focusing on building networks and coalitions for developing concepts and policies to work through. We have an annual summit, which I'll promote again in a moment. It's our 18th annual Food Justice Summit coming up at the beginning of February. Since COVID came and hit, we immediately moved to supporting a network we call the Rhizome Network to really pull in a lot of collaborations across sectors across food systems, and a lot of work that's come out of that is revolved around, particularly on food rescue and re-resourcing, which is, of course, is part of the pyramid of food rescue and resource work, which has a lot to do with climate change in the food system, is kind of minimizing and reducing and reusing food waste. But again, with an equity focus there as well. Some of the policy work we focused on is good for purchasing policy, really getting folks access to land for urban and regional food production. We do work, so part of the policy work is making sure we're influencing the mayors. We're kind of the lead political role in Chicago, and we have an active election right now. Doing work on composting advocacy at the state and city level, working at equitable business licensing and farm bill organizing as well. So one of our main policy efforts that we focused on the last few years and really dig into implementation-wise, set standards called the Good Food Purchasing Policy. It's been around about a little over 10 years, and it sets standards for food that's purchased by institutions. Primarily targeting local government institutions, schools, parks, senior feeding meal programs, spaces where there's concessions on city property that in Chicago that can include the airports. Also looks at hospitals and judicial facilities like jails as well, and set standards that look at and then actually have teeth. So folks who bid out for these food contracts actually get reviewed and go through an assessment process annually to make sure they're hitting these targets. And over 10 cities have also across the country have adopted these policies as well. So a focus on local economy, really paying attention to sustainability of the food. So this is one of the biggest overlaps with climate change efforts. So there's an assessment of not just of how the food is produced, but also as what's served. So there's a real analysis of, really recognizing as there's a transition from meat-based meals to more plant-based meals. There's very direct correlations to lowering carbon footprints through the meal programs while improving, health outcomes at the same time. And then getting back to the summit, it's going to be in early February. It's a free event. The first 2 days are virtual. We're actually in a follow-up session from this there. So thanks, Rose and Dan, for participating in those conversations. And then the 10th is in person in Chicago, and it's a free event. And here's the link, and also drop it in the chat as well. But thank you all. I'll hand it off.
Great. Thank you so much. And Sarah.
Thanks, Rose, and thanks so much for the opportunity to be here. I'm excited to join you all today. My name is Sarah DeHart-Faltico, and I am a program director with Climate and Energy Project. My pronouns are she, her, and CEP, Climate and Energy Project, is a 501c3 that builds resilience in Kansas through equitable clean energy solutions and climate action. And, the other panelists come more from a food systems lens, whereas CEP and our work really comes more from the climate action side of things. Our work primarily falls into 4 categories: climate resilience, clean energy, which is where we got our start, policy, and civic participation. And we use a systems-based approach. So our programming doesn't necessarily fit cleanly under one of those topics. It kind of bleeds across multiple ones all at the same time. An example of that would be some of the work that we are doing in agriculture would fall under climate resilience. But then when we're talking about aquifer depletion, there are obviously implications for community resilience, yes, because these aquifers provide drinking water for many rural communities. But given that 80% of water usage in Kansas is for agricultural purposes, there are also then implications around policy and civic engagement. So, so that's kind of a little background on Climate and Energy Project and what we do. The links between food systems and climate action are important to me personally for a whole slew of different reasons. From a really, really big picture, our entire civilization has been built around food systems. And so, at this point in time, climate change and food systems are so intricately intertwined that work at this nexus is critical. And Rachel spoke a little bit about that when she was introducing herself and some of the realizations that she had. Those are some of the realizations that I've had from personal experience and also some of my work. On a personal note, my family farms in South Central Kansas. And so we're seeing some of the challenges that the Ogallala Aquifer drying up and heat waves and these flood and drought cycles have on rural livelihoods and on communities as a whole. But then during the 10 years prior to my work at Climate and Energy Project, I worked as an organic vegetable farmer using regenerative practices. And I also worked for a nonprofit, urban ag nonprofit, managing a food access program that specifically increased access from small local producers. So the benefit there was that it helped increase food access for folks that had low food access. At the same time, it was benefiting local producers and local farmers. So I've seen in various different ways and wearing different hats, the potential for food systems to serve as some climate action, specifically when we resource smaller regenerative systems instead of massive monocrop input intensive agricultural systems. And so for me, the intersection of this work, food systems and climate action, is a particular passion of mine. Currently, I wear a lot of hats at CEP, and my current work is a microcosm of that. As both Rose and Roger alluded to, through a larger network called the REAMP network, I'm also working with that group to help food policy councils incorporate climate action into their own work. And I'm specifically, will be hosting a workshop for the Kansas Food Action Network, which is a network of food policy councils in Kansas, to more deeply delve into this work, to look at that food policy council climate action toolkit that Rose mentioned, and to see ways in which they can, and some of these food policy councils can incorporate it into their work here in Kansas. Beyond that, as part of the REAMP network as well, I also facilitate the Kansas Wealth State Table, which is a statewide network of climate advocacy, clean energy, environmental and social justice, and ag organizations. And as a collaboration, we all advocate around what we call our wealth priorities. And that's an acronym for water, energy, air, land, transportation, and health. So we just finished up our 2023 policy agenda that we'll be using during this legislative session, and then for community engagement and outreach throughout the year. And we're also planning a Wealth Day, which is an annual day of climate advocacy at the Kansas State Capitol in Topeka. And we'll have as many as 400 attendees probably this year attend at the Capitol and be talking to legislators and around advocating for climate smart policy around those same wealth priorities. Communicating about food systems as a means of climate action is definitely part of that outreach and part of what we do. And then last, I lead our integrated voter engagement work, which the face of it here at CEP is called the Kansas Climate Corps. And so, of course, we support voting rights, and of course, we do getting out the vote work, but we also focus on the entire project is more of a systems approach to building power around organizing, mobilizing communities around clean energy and climate resilience opportunities, and engaging with elected officials as well as the electorate, holding those elected officials accountable and offering training and encouraging climate advocates to ultimately run for office. So there is a lot of work to do, all in all. There's no shortage of work, but I am really happy to be here, and I'm especially happy to be talking about this nexus, which is a particular passion of mine. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you for discussing your work with us. We're excited to have you all here. Can you share with us some examples that you have seen within your work that have demonstrated climate action within food systems? I know some of you have shared a little bit so far, but just really delve into them. Kara, if you'd like to start with that. Kara, I believe you're muted.
Okay. I'm good to go now. Thank you. Yeah, so we are in as I said before, like a historically redlined neighborhood. We've done a lot of advocacy to really shift the narrative and language used around food apartheid and using that terminology instead of food desert. We, in our community, we really are highlighting the richness of who we have in our community and what they bring. That there's we also acknowledge the intentional human created and sustainable inequalities of food access. Because of where they've been situated, the access to fresh food isn't as available. So we see a higher density of pop-ups in our current neighborhood. There's a Walgreens where a lot of folks are getting their food, but not a presence of fresh food. And so we talk about it as something that's happened to them versus a desert being a thriving ecosystem, and really pushes language and value back to the fact that they are community full of culture and rich history. And it allows us to talk more about food justice and the effects of the system and the discrimination that happens as an impact. Now, sorry, one second. Sorry. I'm not finding the stop sharing screen. Can someone help me with that?
The stop share? Oh,
yeah, thank you. So yeah, on a small scale, we work with a lot of small scale farmers that are able to find available resources to make a living off of aren't able to find enough resources to be able to live off of their yield. A lot of their barriers, as I said, that we're are affecting like transportation. There are 3 Black farmers that we have currently that we work with in West Michigan, who all are really going through their own personal crises. And we want to be able to help them tell their story, but in a really honest way. It's really allowed us to see just some of the fracture that a storefront like ours in a capitalist profit generating society or market is doing to harm them. So we have learned so much along the way as far as like how just the historical oppression of people of color creates just barriers in the system to be able to do the work that they do in a way that can support them. And with a lack of access to resources to be able to grow, it really makes it challenging for us to be able to walk beside them and provide that connection to the resources they need. In our work too, another way we see climate action and climate intersect is there's an incredible amount of food waste that happens in grocery markets. We work hard to try to mobilize that into the community. We have a free shelf that sits at the front of our market, and that's just a way for us to be able to put it out and get it out into the community. And we're doing a lot of upcycling of food now and have some plans to do that as well. But 1/3 of all food that's produced in the world goes to waste. And that's like a 1.3 billion tons. So when food gets thrown away, we also waste all the energy and water used to grow that. And we also want to talk about the humans that are growing it and what they're how they're underpaid and under-resourced as well. And so when we talk about true food costs and what it actually does to our bodies or to the bodies of growers, but also what it produces as far as like methane gases, it's really harmful, I think, to the environment. I think I read somewhere that the equivalent to wasted food in America is the equivalent of 3.2 or 32.6 million cars worth of greenhouse gas emissions. So another thing that we do is work closely with Wormies, it's a vermicompost, local vermicomposter. Our collection site of theirs, we're able to mobilize 100% of our waste that has to be thrown away there. So yeah, I'll just park that for now.
Wonderful. Thank you. Roger.
Yeah, I think for the climate work, it's been a bit more indirect and less explicitly. That's its primary purpose through the food work. Or that's not exactly right. I think, again, combined with several other, trying to do several things at the same time. So meeting several other goals. So how do we combine that with food access work? How do we also combine it with, or looking at things that are also going to focus on economic opportunity as well and equity? So if we are pursuing a composting, so the city does not have a formal composting policy currently, and is starting to move in that direction. How does that also benefit community members economically? So it's not just looking at how do we get the biggest hauler, private hauler who already exists, not to call any out right here, but really looking at how does that develop new economic models for communities. I know there's a new, very large scale biodigester that's been built and is in the process of getting its final permitting, called Green Era, which is in a Black and brown community, Auburn, Gresham, on the south side of Chicago. It'll be able to handle several tons of waste daily, and is also in a partnership with the Urban Growers Collective, which is an urban ag equity-based organization in Chicago as well, and using the outputs from the compost biodigester to then provide healthy soils, which is very necessary for community gardens and urban farms, because they're dealing with, I guess, could talk about the redlining around healthy soils, because many of the empty lots that they're operating in are also have some level, probably, most likely some level of contamination, at least lead, but also are not fertile areas. So it's a real opportunity for providing economic development, as well as dealing with the not just landfilling the compost food waste and food scraps, but also generating economic opportunity. And part of the work they're doing now is starting to plan and prepare for work to develop a worker cooperative to who would do that distribution of that food waste as well. So really trying to tie, multiple benefits with climate change. So again, it's not just kind of existing actors, primarily white-owned businesses or corporations who would be making the bulk of the resources from that, and also building in ties to folks who are doing a lot of green equity around green energy development as well. So how, and certainly one of the pieces of the green air biodigester is they will be piping in, they'll be generating methane, natural gas from it, and then they'll be redistributing that back into the pipeline as well, existing natural gas pipeline as well as another economic opportunity, and using the existing natural gas infrastructure while not having to pump or frack new natural gas as well. Stop there.
Excellent, thank you. Great. Rachel, some examples that you've seen within your work that have demonstrated climate action within food systems.
Thanks. It was a good question that you asked, because we actually are, we've been working on a guide for the past 6 months or so, compiling examples of the work that food policy councils, including some of Roger's work, describing your actions, but across the country, what a food policy council has been doing at this intersection. And I think you hit the nail on the head there, Roger, with most groups aren't exclusively focusing on climate, and with a systems lens, you have to understand and work on the intersection of food systems issues that happen to have climate implications, but also equity and food justice and a lot of the components that Kara, you were also speaking to. And so what we've been doing is kind of compiling some key examples of different actions councils have been taking around one, educating the public, because many food policy councils serve as that critical central hub of information and resources for their communities around food systems work. And so with this legitimacy, groups can be they have a real role and space to educate public and also policymakers around this intersection. And so there are groups such as the Rhode Island Food Policy Council, which has produced this interactive dashboard that explores how food systems and climate are connected and shares that information publicly on its website. And I'm happy to share the link. I think it's a really interesting and interactive tool. There are other groups like the Florida Food Policy Council that have created speaker series exploring the intersections related to policy, urban agriculture, climate change, and talking through those intersections with their communities. There are also councils that have been working to shift policies to address climate change and also many of the other food systems implications we're talking about. And so whether it's the good food purchasing policy or some more specifically focused on food systems and climate issues, such as the Cool Food Pledge, but working to get institutions to shift their purchasing policies to align with values-based standards is one area that we're seeing a lot of councils work towards. Another example is councils have been advocating to improve agricultural practices to both reduce agriculture-related emissions and also help farmers to be able to better adapt to climate change. And so increasing that resilience component. As one example, the San Diego Food Systems Alliance secured a grant to support carbon farming practices on local farms and have created a toolkit and report based on their experience. And then I'd also say that a lot of councils serve an important role in planning in their communities. And so helping to make sure that food systems and climate concerns are incorporated into their food systems plans or their sustainability plans, building that bridge and being that resource for helping make those connections for planners in their cities, counties, states, whatever level the food policy council is working at. And I'll mention that this guide, we're still in the process of finishing it, but hopefully in the next few months, we'll be sending it out. So we'll be sharing it on our listserv. And if you're not part of our listserv, but you are part of the Michigan Sustainable Business Forum, hopefully we can make those connections for you if you're interested in it.
Perfect. And Sarah?
Yeah, I think that in general, there's just kind of been a reckoning, like a general reckoning that all of our systems are not just interconnected, but they're interdependent, and there's seen, as the other panelists have mentioned, there's just a lot of momentum building around that understanding, and that you can't just work in silos and just focus on, producers, for example, if you're not also taking into account food waste and the emissions that are associated with that and associated with transporting, food miles and all of that. So in a lot of ways, it feels hopeful to see all of this momentum and some things that are happening here in Kansas. I'm seeing some organizations prioritize indigenous wisdom and centering land use and people in the decision making rather than just policy, right? Because unless you're centering people, then an idea is really just policy and it doesn't necessarily going to benefit who it needs to. So one organization that's been doing some really amazing work to that end is here in Kansas is the Kansas Rural Center. And they've been around for over 40 years. And their mission is to promote long-term, I'll just share this with you, actually, it'll probably be easier so you guys can read it as well. Their mission is to promote long-term health of the land and its people through research, education, and advocacy that advance an economically viable and ecologically sound and socially just food and farming system. And one of the things that they host every year is a food and farm conference. And last year, the entire focus was around the relationship between ag and food systems and climate change. And so I think one of the things that it did was it reached a broader audience than is normally sometimes within these smaller circles of food policy councils or urban ag work and food systems work. Sometimes we are all in an echo chamber at times. And I think that one of the things that they did by having their entire agenda be around this intersection was to help introduce some of these ideas to a broader audience and get people thinking about it, specifically around community resilience as it relates to producers being able to continue farming in the face of climate change and the impacts that they're seeing in their rural areas. Their keynote speakers were Dr. Dan Wildcat and Dr. Stephen Lerner of Step by Step, which is a program that gathers individuals to openly talk about climate change. And the programming always begins with, and throughout the programming, it's rooted in an indigenous worldview. So there's some of that centering and some of that equity built in, and really looking to our elders and indigenous wisdom about how we can move forward based off of some of the mess that we've created, right? Kansas Rural Center is also working with the Prairie Band Potawatomi tribe on some food and farm and climate resilience planning. And that's just in the very nascent stages, but I'm really excited to see the work that comes out of that for sure as well. And one of the other organizations that I've seen doing some great work around equity and food access is an organization in Kansas City proper called the Casey Farm School at Gibbs Road. And they empower individuals of all ages and ancestries and abilities through on-farm hands-on experiences and vocational education. So they have programming for toddlers all the way up to adults, they say, like from ages 1 to 101. There's workshops, there's camps, there's apprenticeships for teenagers and young adults, and they integrate with a nearby school district to integrate some of the curriculum into the school districts, like STEM programming. It's pretty cool, a lot of the stuff that they're doing. And around food justice and access work, stuff that they're doing, all of their food and all of their programming is pay what you're able. And so from an access standpoint, they really want to make it available to anyone. And they also have something else that they've been doing called Let's Grow Wyandotte. And they started this back in 2020 during the pandemic, where they provided the plant starts and the seeds and compost and supplies and mentorship and just kind of general solidarity to help residents grow their own food, be it in their backyard or their front yard or pots or patios or straw bales. They've helped start, and this is in Wyandotte County, and I should stop and mention that Wyandotte County is ranks the lowest in health outcomes and lowest in all sorts of markers of social health, essentially, out of all of the counties in Kansas. It is the most densely populated, and it is the most economically and ethnically diverse county in the state. And so they've started over 250 growing or like basically gardens or farms or whatever since 2020. And this year in 2023, I'm excited because some of the cohort for 2023, the cohort's going to be led by folks that were participants in past years. So there's some elements of like agency and leadership development happening there, and folks that are sharing their experiences about what works and what doesn't work from experience, as opposed to, just, hey, do this, right? One of the other things that they do that I really appreciate is they host these Wyandotte County roundtables, and these are quarterly community engagement opportunities where they invite members of Wyandotte County to come share a meal at the farm, or they go to, like maybe a religious center or a community center that's somewhere else in the county, and they just want to listen to residents and what they have to say about their hopes and their dreams and expectations for their communities. Maybe for the farm, and find ways to overlap or find the overlaps there and find ways to maybe fill needs that they have. Some of the outcomes that have come from that have been the Let's Grow Wyandotte program, have been the Pay What You're Able programming. And they've also partnered with Kansas City, Kansas to provide like increased transportation and free transportation to farmers markets and other food access outlets. But probably the most direct link to climate action that they've done is they created a sustainability action plan. And it was a volunteer-led group that called the Eco Team. And they wanted to look at what they could do to ensure the farm itself continues to be sustainable and continues to be climate resilient. And so they divided it into, I want to say like maybe 10 or 11 categories, looking at how to rebuild soil health, how to restore the land's natural biodiversity, how to embrace green energy and building technologies, and in doing so, essentially strengthen community connections and create a healthier environment. So it ended up being a 67-page document that they want to serve as a model for others as well, whether it be individuals or organizations or entire communities, to adopt some of the practices therein. And I just dropped that action plan in the chat for if people want to take a look at it, because there's a lot in there, and it's scalable down to a home or like an individual residence, all the way up to an organization or even a community. And so that's some cool stuff that's happening around here. And I'll stop there.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. All right. So as I mentioned earlier in our program, our Food Policy Council Action Team has produced a Food Policy Council Climate Action Toolkit, which has come up a couple different times. It's designed to help councils and food networks, along with their stakeholders, like many of you, provide councils with the support to educate and inspire their local community and legislators on the intersection of food and climate. We have some good opportunities for sustainability integration and education in there, easily digestible examples of climate action within food systems like you've heard about today. We'll be adding the link to the toolkit with our follow-up email, and then we'll throw it in the chat as well at the end. But in addition, we've seen our partners here participate in some amazing examples of climate action that can be repeated throughout either the Midwest or throughout the nation. So would all of you please share some successful ways that you have educated and inspired others to take climate action within your local community and with your legislators? Let's go ahead and start with Rachel.
Thanks, Rose. So one example that jumped to mind is something that I participated in with a whole host of other advocates. We were working to encourage the DC City Council to adopt the Green Food Purchasing Act. And this was a successful effort. Several of us testified to the City Council advocating to set a target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions associated with the city's food procurement at public institutions. And they set a target, and it was the first local jurisdiction in the country to pass such a target. And so that was, I think, a really great example that we're advocates from youth to researchers to community organizations, and Friends of the Earth was a major leader in that effort. And so it was I think it passed 2 years ago, I believe. There have been similar efforts at our state level, but have come up short for various reasons. And so that was one example from a legislative perspective. And then there have also been efforts within our own institution, Johns Hopkins, to make a similar target. And they're going through a planning process right now with the sustainability plan. And so there have been several of us within the university working to start measuring where food-related emissions are currently, and to set targets as well. And so I think procurement is a really great example of a way that you can address multiple values at once, and have a clear data set and a clear way to make targets and make change. And I think that's one other thing I'll mention is that I really appreciate about these efforts is the focus on making sure that the options are available for people to choose more climate friendly foods, and that it's not a restriction or saying we're banning this or we're removing items, but rather elevating the more climate friendly options and making sure that they're available so that people who want to choose to eat that way can. Because if you're confined to eating what's available, then you're limited to those choices. And so can we make those choices more aligned with our values?
Great. Sarah?
Yeah, from a personal standpoint, I have participated in food policy councils. I was a founding member of Johnson County Food Policy Council, which is a county that's in the Kansas City metro area. And I also sit on some boards. And so, there are definitely ways that you can find work being done and volunteer with those folks. There's never a shortage of food systems organizations that need volunteers and would love some help. So, if you're looking for ways that you personally can take some climate action, I would say look for boards of organizations that are doing good food system work in your community. Sit on those boards, get involved with the work that they're doing, get involved with the communities that they're supporting. And also, something else is making sure that you are active with your local municipalities around. A lot of the municipalities now are looking to incorporate climate resilience in their food systems planning and food systems planning in general in their city plans. And so, start looking at those plans and be asking municipalities like, do you have food systems plans? Is there climate resilience built into it? And start asking those questions. And if not, start asking the questions as to why or why not. Let them know the importance of finding solutions at this nexus. And your local city council members want to hear that. They want to hear from you. And so that's definitely something that we do on a personal level. Like just in my neighborhood association, we invite our local city council members and members of the city government to talk about things and to just kind of have opportunities for the community to ask those kinds of questions and let it be known that they want those kinds of things to be for the city to be working on that kind of stuff. So, again, I think that volunteering and finding ways to elevate your voice and to find other folks that share some of these same values as you is a great way to start doing some of that work. And like I said, there's probably people are always looking for some extra hands and some extra help.
Wonderful. Kara, Roger, anything to add?
Yeah, I can go next. Yeah, the perfect lead in to what I was going to share. Kind of at the beginning of our work, we had a little meeting with a lot of other folks within the community, community partners that had kind of hands in our local food system. So if you could pull up that like graphic for me, that'd be awesome. But we had a really robust conversation on what like a more just local food system could look like. And this visual, I think, really helped us. It came out of the conversation that we had together, but we really need each other to partner to make impact on this, on our local food system. It does touch, like all of us have kind of talked about, the intersection of all of our work really lends to kind of this circular model. So, there's a strong presence of charitable organizations here in town that are doing more of the historical work around food. But with kind of the rise, and like Kent County Food Policy Council has been doing such good work. We have some local farms like New City Neighbors who also have been really leading us by example in this work locally. So I think I see Southeast Market as just a small piece of kind of the whole of this work around food systems. So if we continue, I think, to be working with each other, working with folks more collaboratively, especially the Michigan Good Food Charter. If you guys have not looked that up yet, like they have a really great published document kind of outlining more of this work that I think I'm going to hold our staff and our work to accountable to, because I think, again, like they've done such a good job of outlining what this greater work looks like for all of us. So that's all I wanted to share. Thanks.
Roger.
Yeah, I think we've, worked closely with and done a lot of advocacy. I mentioned earlier with our mayors in Chicago. They're kind of the real locus of power. So it's incredibly important to have good inroads and support from them as well. It is helpful to have city council support, but primarily most policies driven from the mayor's office first, and then get support from the city council locally. In Cook County, which Chicago sits within, it's the county that also surrounds it. We've developed good relationships with the Cook County Board of Commissioners, which is functionally the city councilors, and they actually have a lot of control and power. And so we work closely with them, but we also work closely both as well with administrators. So the other key partners we work with is the departments of public health in both the county and the city, who are really helpful for then getting into the administrative side of the work and really focused on the administrative, or on the work, on the implementation side, where you get the political leadership to help push the administrators to move forward on it. And so if there's any pushback publicly, you've got the backstop of political support, and particularly ongoing as staff and leaders change within the administrative department. So it's important to have both sides working collaboratively. At the state level, we work with several other partners, the Illinois Environmental Council and the Illinois Stewardship Alliance, to do advocacy at the state level. So we've been able to make some, so like when we got the compost laws changed at the state level to allow for local and neighborhood level composting in the city, we had to have those partnerships in place, and have been able to make some good inroads, as well as getting like an Illinois worker cooperative business type formed a few years ago, and doing a lot of work around local procurement at schools. So we had to do big collaboration last year. Illinois was one of the last two states, Illinois and New York, who mandated only you had to take the lowest bid for any privatized school food bids, which meant they couldn't take, those school districts couldn't take into account anything around sustainability, worker standards, quality of food. But so that was unlocked, and that was done with a lot of collaboration as well. And then now we're starting to move into more farm bill advocacy as well. So we're starting to build some more bridges with our federal legislators as well.
Excellent, thank you. Wonderful. As I did mention earlier in our conversations, the Food Policy Council Action Team will be facilitating a mini grant offering to provide seed funding for food policy councils in the Great Lakes region to develop and execute local projects over the course of a 6-month facilitated cohort. This cohort will develop climate action plans like we've talked about throughout the webinar today, or projects in local communities, collaborating with each other and collaborating with the action team through a series of group and individual sessions with coaches. It's an opportunity that's open to all food policy councils in the region, and it'll influence a substantial network to equitably eliminate greenhouse gas emissions and encourage local food stakeholders to advocate for policies that promote food and agriculture systems. The application process will be opening on February 1st, and you'll receive more information about this mini grant opportunity with the follow-up email with for this webinar, or you can email MiSBF with any questions. So thank you all for sharing your excellent experiences and knowledge. We'd love to open it up for some questions. We only have a couple of minutes left, but if anyone wants to hang on, we'd be happy to answer more questions, and you could submit them via the chat or the question answer function in Zoom. I know I did see several come into the chat. So I know one of which was, with so much surplus food being wasted, for example, at the wholesale and retail level, because it cannot be collected by local food banks, has anyone seen solutions around food rescue that involve routed collection of bulk donations outside of the Feeding America network, operational, policy, or both?
You know, I was going to say, I don't necessarily know if this quite fits the bill, but I do know that it's the city of Olathe, which is in Johnson County. They are just now getting ready to launch a citywide food composting program. And it's not necessarily bulk pickup. So they haven't figured out, that's the logistics of pickup, I think, is probably still part of the last frontier in terms of challenges, but they are going to have at least one, if not two, drop-off sites that are then going to be picked up on a weekly basis for composting at a larger site. And and so it's not necessarily going through those networks, but it is something that's happening citywide. It's not something that is just set it out on your curb, unfortunately, but it is a first step. And I know that this is something that the Johnson County Food Policy Council had been working on back when they first got founded. Oh my gosh, about 6 or 7 years ago now. So that's one thing that's happening around that I can think of. And again, it's not necessarily around, that's around like food waste that's already gone bad, but in terms of redistribution through other networks, I don't know of anything at a large scale, no.
Thank you for that. And we are having some people introduce some of the same answers of their own into the chat. So please check that out. Some of you have asked if we'll be providing some of the information from the chat, and we will add those notes into an email after this chat as well. I do have another question. Best thoughts on fresh food prices? That's a big, that's another webinar, but any quick quick answers?
Yeah, I'll tackle that maybe just shortly. The supply chain is really fractured. We're seeing kind of the effects, I believe, of the pandemic still kind of rolling out. So as far as we actually are seeing, avocados are ridiculously expensive, and that's something that has to be flown in. But yeah, I don't have too much. I think there's a 9% increase is what we were told, 8 to 9% increase of fresh food prices. So yeah, it's just something, again, when we're dependent on a more dominant food system, that local food systems are really where we should be investing, I think, our time and resources to make sure that we have more to offer. And yeah, teaching folks to grow, I think, will also lend to giving them more power to be in control of their food systems.
Excellent. We do have some questions in the question and answer section. If somebody's interested in starting a farm on their property, would the best route for funding be a USDA loan, or are there better funding options for greenhouses or facilities? I don't know if that's a question any of our panelists can answer.
It would depend on a lot of factors. Depending on what's available locally, how the farm is organized or not. Is it registered as a business? If you're going to get a lot of USDA resources, are you registered with your local FFA office? So there's a lot of things that would come into play and be helpful to try to find a local resource partner who can help you navigate pros and cons of each of those locally.
Wonderful. And I think we have another question regarding backyard composting. I think that's the same answer. It depends on a lot of different, your locale and a lot of different variables on that. So I will let everybody know we will provide email addresses for all of our speakers today. So any follow-up questions that you want, you can forward them along to us or forward them along to them. Excuse me. So thank you everybody so much for attending. If you found our talk valuable today, please do consider becoming a member or checking out our website for upcoming webinars or other opportunities at misbf.org. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.